What if I told you that every month, representatives from more than 60 of the world's strongest central banks meet behind closed doors in a Swiss building to discuss plans that could completely redefine how we buy groceries, pay our mortgage, or save for retirement? No cameras. No reporters. Not even assistants in the room. Yet the discussions held in those marble-lined hallways of Basel may determine the fate of every dollar sitting in our wallets. Think about this. When was the last time you genuinely wondered whether your dollars would still hold value tomorrow? Probably never. That certainty comes from decades of absolute dollar dominance so deeply rooted that imagining a different global currency feels like fiction. But what if those quiet monthly gatherings are preparing for exactly that scenario? A world where the American dollar is no longer the currency everyone fights to hold. These meetings aren't about routine interest rate debates that influence credit card APRs. According to the Bank for International Settlement's own scheduling documents, these are crisis simulation workshops, rehearsals for events that would have seemed unthinkable only 5 years ago. The nightmare scenario on the agenda? A world in which the US dollar loses its status as the planet's reserve currency within the next decade. Here's what should make us sit up straight. Christine Lagarde and Jerome Powell aren't debating whether this change might come. They're preparing for when it arrives. Conference papers show that central banks around the world already have detailed contingency plans for running international trade without relying on American currency. Our government knows this, they just aren't exactly mentioning it in primetime news segments. If you want proof this is no longer theoretical, look at the 2025 survey from the World Gold Council. 73% of central banks plan to cut their dollar reserves over the next 5 years. Why would they do that unless they foresee a fundamental shift in the dollar's future value? The BIS has even issued formal guidance encouraging member institutions to accelerate dollar alternative systems through its innovation hubs. These aren't academic thought experiments. They're literal playbooks for shifting away from the financial architecture that has supported our entire cost of living, from gas prices to the cost of international travel. And we don't hear about any of this because if the public learned too early how serious these discussions were, it could trigger the very financial panic they're trying to avoid. But the signs are everywhere. Central bankers no longer talk about possibilities. According to recent Federal Reserve notes, private discussions have moved from brainstorming to comparing implementation timelines. When the world's monetary architects stop asking what if, and begin asking how soon, that's when we should pay attention. Remember when Bitcoin appeared and we laughed it off as some nerdy internet hobby? While the world joked about crypto memes, central banks were quietly building something far more powerful: digital money they can control directly, without the limitations of paper currency. In China right now, millions of people buy their morning coffee, ride public transport, and receive government salaries in a currency that exists only as code. The digital yuan has already processed 7 trillion yuan in transactions, nearly $1 trillion US, through systems that bypass every Western bank we've ever known. Here's some perspective. Within just a year, digital yuan transactions jumped from 1.88 trillion to 7 trillion yuan. Workers in 17 provinces get paid this way. Students pay university fees with a tap of their phones. A fully parallel monetary world has evolved while most Americans still argue about whether mobile payment apps are safe. But China isn't alone. The European Central Bank has sped up its digital euro timeline far beyond what the public hears. While headlines distract us with inflation debates, engineers in Frankfurt are testing systems capable of supporting an entire continent on programmable digital currency. What does this mean for regular people like us? Today, sending money internationally means paying ridiculous fees and waiting 2 or 3 days for clearance. The new systems settle cross-border transactions in seconds. The BIS has confirmed that its mBridge platform has reached minimum viable product status, meaning it can handle real-world settlements between central banks right now. Here's the part that should make us pause. Russia and Iran have already completed major energy transactions using blockchain-based systems built to completely avoid the US dollar. We're talking about billion-dollar energy flows routed through networks where America's currency is irrelevant. BRICS nations have launched their own payment systems designed to route international trade without ever touching SWIFT, the backbone of current global transfers. Brazil's payment infrastructure connects directly with India, Russia, and China. 23 countries now send payments through channels where dollars are optional, not required. Why is this shift unstoppable? Because the new financial technology is evolving faster than our traditional banking system can keep up. While US wire transfers rely on messaging standards older than the internet itself, These new platforms use AI and quantum-grade encryption to provide nearly unbreakable security and instant transactions. And here's what stunned central bankers themselves. Digital currencies don't just replace paper money. They expand what money can do. When currency becomes programmable code, the power shifts from bankers to whoever controls the code base. And right now that is in Washington. Let's do a quick quiz. Which economic alliance represents 45% of the global population and nearly 30% of global GDP? If you guessed BRICS, you're already ahead of most Americans, people who don't realize how rapidly this bloc is eroding the dollar's global importance. Now here's something that should hit home. The country that created the petrodollar system, Saudi Arabia, is now involved in payment networks intentionally designed to operate without dollars. When the architect of dollar dominance starts building alternatives, what does that signal? Picture this: you book a vacation to Europe next year. You assume your dollars will be welcomed everywhere. But what if European businesses prefer euros in order to avoid delays and transaction fees tied to dollar settlements? What if our global currency quietly stops being global? The Atlantic Council reports that BRICS countries now conduct over $100 billion a year in energy deals that never touch the dollar. Russia ships oil to China and gets paid in yuan, which it immediately spends on Chinese goods. India pays Russia in rupees, which are used to purchase Indian products in return. Closed-loop trade systems, entirely outside the financial structures we depend on. And here's the part most Americans never hear. This coordination isn't just economic, it's strategic. BRICS nations conduct military financial exercises simulating responses to sanctions or currency disruptions. They're not just building an alternative financial system, they're preparing to defend it. Parallel institutions now exist across Asia, Africa, and Latin America: banks, development lenders, payment systems, all operating independently of U.S. oversight. Infrastructure projects worth hundreds of billions proceed without a dime passing through American institutions. And this affects us more than we think. Trade agreements now routinely include non-dollar settlement clauses. Dollar dominance isn't collapsing in one dramatic moment, it's being chipped away one bilateral contract at a time. World Gold Council data shows synchronized gold purchasing programs among BRICS central banks. In 2024 alone, central banks bought over 1,000 tons of gold, the third straight year that record levels were reached. These aren't random purchases. They're coordinated reserve transformations. Meanwhile, commodity exchanges across the world now process nearly $2 trillion annually through systems that don't require dollars at all, from oil to wheat to metals. Every new payment link, every currency swap treaty, every bilateral energy deal moves the world further from dollar dependence. The result? A fully parallel financial universe capable of operating without American involvement. Imagine showing up to your job tomorrow and being told that your employer restructured its international operations to avoid using dollars. Sounds absurd, but multinational corporations are already doing this, saving millions on conversion fees by settling deals in yuan or euros instead. Take German automakers. They now settle multi-billion-dollar supply chain contracts entirely in yuan and euros. These aren't trial runs. These are long-term commitments for electric vehicle production lines, the very cars Americans will buy next year. When global manufacturers find it cheaper and smoother to operate without dollars, the question becomes, what happens to demand for the currency sitting in our pockets? And if global demand declines, what happens to our purchasing power? The shift is most dramatic in energy markets, the sector that hits us directly at the gas pump. Russia's energy exports to China and India exceed $100 billion annually, all in non-dollar transactions. The oil refined for our gas stations may have been bought with yuan or rupees, bypassing the pricing systems that once ensured American influence. This affects our savings too. Central banks worldwide have drastically changed their reserve strategies. Poland raised its gold reserves from 13% to 20% in just 2 years. Turkey, Kazakhstan, and the Czech Republic followed suit. These are rapid structural pivots away from the dollar-denominated assets inside our retirement accounts. The African Development Bank approved $50 billion in financing specifically engineered to avoid the dollar. Roads, power grids, water systems, all funded through alternative currencies. Even shipping companies now prefer multi-currency payments. The cargo heading to American stores may be paid for in euros, yuan, or other currencies, removing dollar costs from global prices. Universities across Europe and Asia now operate large parts of their finance departments without ever touching the dollar system. The international education our children pursue may one day run entirely through non-dollar arrangements. Multinational corporations have already split their treasury operations into two worlds, one for dollar systems and one optimized for the growing BRICS ecosystem. These parallel structures allow companies to function even if dollar-based networks become slow, expensive, or unstable. 5 years ago, using anything other than dollars required special justification. Today it's the other way around. Treasury managers increasingly ask, why are we still using dollars when faster, cheaper systems exist? The cracks in dollar dominance aren't theoretical. They affect what we pay at the grocery store, how we invest, and what kind of future our kids inherit. While Americans argue about politics and trends online, construction crews across Africa, Asia, and South America are building the backbone of a financial world prepared to run without the dollar. And most of us don't even realize it's already here. Far beneath the Indian Ocean, crews are laying new fiber optic routes that link Asia, Africa, and the Middle East without ever touching Western communication hubs. These aren't just internet cables, they're financial lifelines, built to carry cross-border payments and settlement flows through channels the United States can't monitor or influence. For decades, most international money has ultimately passed through systems America could oversee. These new networks break that pattern completely, carving out global trade routes that sit beyond Washington's reach. In Singapore, one of the world's largest clearing and settlement hubs is rising on reclaimed coastline. When it becomes fully operational, it will process trillions in annual transactions without routing anything through New York or London. The next time we wonder why a bank wire takes days and costs a small fortune, remember that other nations are building networks that clear yuan, rupees, and regional currencies in seconds. Hong Kong's financial district now hums with massive data centers powering cross-border systems that never require dollars at all. BIS project reports confirm that these centers maintain real-time links to central banks from the Gulf to Southeast Asia, forming a 24/7 settlement grid. The Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank recently unveiled its own settlement platform, 57 countries applauding a system that finances roads, power plants, and long-term projects without relying on Western institutions. The infrastructure of two continents is now being built with money that treats the dollar as optional. Even physical commodity markets are transforming. New strategic petroleum reserves in the UAE can price and settle oil in yuan, euros, or local currencies. These facilities don't just store fuel, they create marketplaces where energy trades don't depend on the dollar's value, directly influencing what Americans pay at the pump. Ports across Southeast Asia are installing cargo tracking and payment systems wired directly into regional currency networks, meaning a shipment destined for our local stores can be released and paid for without touching dollar-based rails. Insurance markets have shifted too. Lloyd's of London now sells policies that protect Asian companies from dollar volatility, a reversal that reveals just how dramatically global finance is moving away from US-centric systems. And the scale of the investment behind this shift is staggering. More than $200 billion has already been poured into financial infrastructure explicitly designed to reduce dollar reliance. What makes this transformation irreversible is simple necessity. As trade expands among non-Western economies, they need systems built for their currencies, not ours. Since legacy networks were engineered around dollar supremacy, new systems are naturally emerging to serve relationships that no longer depend on American participation. A post-dollar framework isn't being discussed, it's being constructed, cable by cable and server by server. You may have noticed that financial headlines rarely ask if the dollar will lose dominance anymore. Now they ask when and how fast. That shift in tone tells us everything. Central banks aren't speaking in hypotheticals. Poland publicly sets gold reserve targets. China outlines digital yuan timelines with precision. Brazil maps out real peso trade protocols. These aren't dreams, they're schedules. According to the Atlantic Council's CBDC tracker, by 2026, over 40 countries will have interoperable digital currencies. While many Americans still fumble with mobile pay apps, dozens of nations are coordinating currency systems designed to operate entirely outside the dollar's orbit. Training programs for central bankers now focus on managing multi-currency transitions and stabilizing economies during reserve shift periods. Meanwhile, trade agreements signed over the past year routinely include non-dollar settlement clauses as standard practice. Emergency financial protocols can now activate dollar-free operations in hours. BRICS nations maintain live currency swap lines and coordinated intervention tools tested repeatedly through joint simulations. Their crisis drills no longer ask, "What if dollar systems fail?" They assume viable alternatives exist and focus on optimizing the shift between them. Perhaps the most telling sign is what global officials no longer say. Gone are the polite affirmations about preserving dollar-based structures. Instead, they discuss post-dollar systems with the same casual tone once reserved for interest rate updates. When payment networks can already handle trillions, when emergency frameworks maintain liquidity without dollars, and when entire trade relationships operate profitably in other currencies, the momentum becomes impossible to reverse. Abandoning these new systems would be more disruptive than continuing the transition. The question is no longer whether the dollar's privileged status will fade. The real question is how quickly the world completes the shift, and whether the United States adapts or gets left reacting to a system it no longer fully controls.